Wednesday morning, Israel controlled the most advanced air force in the Middle East. 280 F-35s. Total regional superiority. Right now, those aircraft are grounded, vulnerable, and the U.S. Navy carrier group meant to protect them is operating blind. The Wednesday 0450 saturation wave explains the gap. Here is what it actually shows. If you have been following this conflict daily, you have been watching escalation, missile exchanges, interception rates, Iron Dome performance metrics. What happened Wednesday morning is not another escalation. It is the moment the defensive architecture collapsed completely. The coverage is focused on the drone count, 15,000 units. What the coverage is missing is the technical reality that made the outcome inevitable the moment Iran committed to the saturation strategy. The Aegis radar aboard the USS Gerald Ford has specific processing limits. The Iron Dome has a documented reload time. The GPS jamming has a radius. When you cross-reference those three technical specifications against what Iran deployed at 0450 Wednesday, the word that fits is not attack. The word that fits is checkmate. Military families near installations in the Gulf understand what a blinded carrier group means. This script walks through the technical evidence, the tactical arithmetic, and the two paths forward from a position no U.S. battle group has faced since the Cold War. If you want to understand not just the drone count, but the defensive mathematics that made this outcome inevitable from the first minute, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Let us go through this completely. Let us start with Colonel Douglas Macgregor's testimony because it is the foundation of everything that follows. Macgregor stated on the record Wednesday afternoon that Israeli F-35s were caught on the ground during the 0450 saturation wave, and described the event using the specific word massacre. Under questioning, he clarified that he was not describing aircraft destroyed. He was describing aircraft rendered non-operational due to inability to achieve safe takeoff under GPS-denied conditions, combined with airfield saturation. That is not a minor distinction. Israeli F-35s required GPS confirmation for navigation system initialization. Without it, the aircraft can physically take off, but cannot navigate or engage. Read that again. The most advanced stealth fighter in the world, grounded not by destruction, but by the absence of a signal. Macgregor's language, massacre, refers to the operational reality that 280 aircraft became static targets the moment the jamming radius expanded over their bases. That is evidence one. The F-35 fleet is intact physically and destroyed operationally. The second piece, the Aegis radar system aboard the USS Gerald Ford. The technical manual is public. The AN-SPY-6 radar can track up to 1,000 targets simultaneously. It can guide intercepts against approximately 250 targets in a single engagement window. Processing capacity is the hard limit. When the system receives data on more than 1,000 incoming objects, it does not slow down. It stops discriminating. The radar continues to display contacts, but fire control loses prioritization. Documents obtained through defense procurement filings show that the system was designed to handle saturation attacks in the 300 to 500 unit range. 15,000 drones is not double the threshold. It is 30 times the threshold. What that means in plain terms? The Aegis system did not fail. It performed exactly as designed. The design was never built for this. The scale of Iron Dome depletion is the third piece, and it closes the argument. Iron Dome interceptors, the Tamir missiles, cost approximately $50,000 per unit. Israel maintains an inventory estimated at 2,000 ready interceptors, with an additional 3,000 in strategic reserve. Verified intelligence briefings confirm that Israel fired 1,400 interceptors in the 72 hours leading up to Wednesday's saturation wave. Reload time per battery is 40 minutes under ideal conditions. When the 15,000 unit wave hit at 0450, Iron Dome batteries across the northern and central zones were in reload cycle. The arithmetic is public. 1,400 interceptors fired, 2,000 in ready inventory. At 0450 Wednesday, Israel had approximately 600 interceptors available for immediate launch. 15,000 targets. The ratio is not close. It is not a gap. It is arithmetic confirmation that interception was impossible. But the 15,000 drones are not the collapse. The defensive mathematics are the collapse. What the coverage is missing completely is not the size of the swarm. It is the mechanism that makes swarm saturation irreversible once the threshold is crossed. Defensive systems operate on a reload and reacquire cycle. You intercept the first wave. You reload. You reacquire targets. You intercept the second wave. The cycle depends on one assumption. The gap between waves is longer than your reload time. When the attacker removes the gap, the cycle breaks. That is the framework. Defensive saturation operates on simple math. When incoming volume exceeds interception capacity multiplied by reload time, the system fails completely. Here is what that framework looks like in this specific situation. Iron Dome batteries have a 40-minute reload window. Iran's 15,000 unit swarm was not launched simultaneously. It was launched in rolling waves separated by 12-minute intervals. 12-minute intervals against a 40-minute reload time. The math does not allow for recovery. By the time the first battery completed reload, the fourth wave was already inside intercept range. The system did not fail because it was overwhelmed in one moment. It failed because the attacker understood the reload time and designed the wave intervals to prevent recovery. That is example one. The same framework appears in the Aegis blinding. The ANSPY 6 radar does not shut down when it hits 1,000 tracked targets. It enters priority mode. Priority mode means the system defaults to tracking the targets it calculates as highest threat. Fastest, closest, largest radar cross-section. Here is the problem. The 15,000 drones Iran deployed are small, slow, and electronically identical. The radar cannot distinguish priority among identical low-threat signatures, so it cycles. It scans all 15,000, assigns temporary priority, rescans, reassigns. The system is functioning. It is simply functioning inside a target environment it was never designed to process. The mechanism is the same. The attacker identified the threshold, then deployed volume calculated to exceed it, not by a margin, by a factor of 30. What to watch for using this framework? Any defensive system has a public or semi-public specification for maximum engagement capacity. The specification is always written as a range, up to X targets, or as many as Y simultaneous intercepts. When you see that range, the actual hard ceiling is the lower number, not the upper. The upper number is the laboratory test. The lower number is the field deployed reality. If a system says it can track 1,000 targets, start watching for saturation behavior at 600. If it says it can intercept 250, expect degradation at 150. The framework gives you a 20-minute head start on understanding what the official assessment will say 6 hours later. The mechanism exists because defensive systems are sold on best-case performance and deployed in worst-case environments. The gap between the sales figure and the field reality is where saturation lives. Contractors specify capacity under ideal conditions: single vector threats, clear weather, no jamming, full crew readiness. Combat introduces all of those variables simultaneously. The real capacity is always lower than the published capacity. Always. What this means for the decisions U.S. Central Command makes in the next 72 hours is the harder question. If this analysis is giving you what the daily coverage is missing, subscribe right now. Share this with someone who is trying to understand what is actually happening. Let us keep going. The closest historical parallel is not Desert Storm. It is the first 72 hours of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. October 6, 1973. Egyptian forces crossed the Suez Canal under the heaviest surface-to-air missile umbrella ever deployed in combat to that point. Israeli Air Force had total superiority in the region. Within 6 hours, that superiority was gone. Egyptian SAM batteries, SA-2, SA-3, SA-6 missiles in overlapping coverage, created a 30-mile deep zone where Israeli aircraft could not operate. The Israeli response was doctrine: suppress the SAMs with airstrikes, then restore air operations. The doctrine failed. Every airstrike entered the SAM umbrella and took losses. Israel lost over 100 aircraft in the first 3 days, not because Egyptian missiles were more advanced than Israeli jets, because the Egyptians deployed enough missiles in tight enough proximity that interception became arithmetic. Even with a kill rate favoring Israel, the volume guaranteed hits. The mechanism completed its cycle over 96 hours. Israeli aircraft could not suppress the SAM network because they could not survive long enough inside the network to destroy enough launchers. The Egyptian umbrella held until October 9, when Israeli ground forces flanked the SAM line and attacked the batteries from the rear. Air superiority was not restored by air power. It was restored by ground maneuver. The parallel is not the technology. The parallel is the mechanism. Volume defeats interception when the attacker understands the defender's reload and reacquisition cycle and designs the volume to exceed it. What is the same? A regional military power with total air superiority finds that superiority neutralized by a saturation strategy built on arithmetic rather than advanced technology. What is different? In 1973, the SAM umbrella was geographically fixed. Israeli forces could maneuver around it. In 2026, the drone swarm is mobile. The GPS jamming is radius-based, and there is no flank. The electronic warfare envelope covers the entire operational area. The Egyptian SAM line could be bypassed. The Iranian jamming radius cannot. What makes the current situation unique is the addition of the electronic warfare layer. In 1973, Israeli aircraft could still navigate. They knew where they were, where the threats were, and where the targets were. They simply could not survive the missile volume. In 2026, Israeli F-35s cannot navigate inside the jamming radius, even if the airspace were clear. The swarm is layer 1. The jamming is layer 2. Both layers have to be defeated simultaneously, or neither can be defeated at all. Let us step back from the specific Wednesday event and look at what this means for the larger trajectory. Here is what happens if U.S. Central Command repositions the carrier group east, outside the strait, and accepts temporary loss of air superiority while diplomatic channels open. In the next 48 hours, the USS Gerald Ford moves to a position where Aegis can reacquire clear radar picture without the clutter of 15,000 drones inside literal range. The movement is framed publicly as routine repositioning. Iran does not interfere because the movement is east, not west, and represents de-escalation. The carrier is farther from Iranian coastline, not closer. GPS jamming continues, but no longer affects U.S. naval operations outside the radius. In the next 2 to 4 weeks, Israel grounds all F-35 sorties and shifts to ground-based defensive posture. Iron Dome batteries are resupplied from U.S. and European stockpiles. The public story is maintenance and systems upgrade. The private reality is that Israeli Air Force cannot operate inside the jamming envelope and will not attempt sorties until the electronic warfare problem is solved or the jamming is shut down. Back-channel negotiations open through Swiss and Omani intermediaries. Iran's position is withdrawal of U.S. carrier presence from the Gulf in exchange for shutdown of the jamming network. U.S. position is shutdown of the jamming network as precondition for any negotiation. The gap is narrow enough that mediation is plausible. In the next 6 to 12 months, the strategic landscape reflects a new ceiling on U.S. power projection in the region. Carrier groups remain effective in open ocean. They do not enter the Gulf without risk of saturation that the current defensive suite cannot handle. Israel maintains F-35 fleet, but operates under the knowledge that Iranian electronic warfare can ground the fleet anytime the decision is made to activate the jamming radius. The long-term consequence is that air superiority becomes conditional rather than permanent. When the jamming is off, Israel controls the airspace. When the jamming is on, no one controls the airspace. The equilibrium is unstable but survivable. Regional powers accept that neither side can achieve total dominance, and both sides can deny dominance to the other. Swarm saturation is cheap, scalable, and unrestricted by treaty. Here is what happens if U.S. Central Command attempts to restore Aegis operational capability while the carrier group remains in position and Israel launches retaliatory strikes from southern bases outside the jamming zone. In the next 48 hours, USS Gerald Ford holds position in the strait. U.S. engineers attempt radar reset and software patch to filter the drone clutter and restore fire control. The attempt requires the Aegis system to go fully offline for 18 minutes during the reset cycle. Iran interprets the reset attempt as preparation for strike operations. During the 18-minute window, Iranian coastal batteries launch anti-ship missiles at the carrier group. The missiles are subsonic and detectable, but Aegis is offline. The carrier group relies on point defense systems, CRAM, and close-in weapon systems. Some missiles are intercepted. At least one hits. In the next 2 to 4 weeks, the strike on the carrier, even if damage is minimal, triggers Article 5 consultations within NATO because the USS Gerald Ford is flagship of a multinational task force that includes French and British vessels. Israel, interpreting the carrier strike as proof that U.S. defensive umbrella is compromised, launches ground-based retaliatory cruise missile strikes against Iranian drone production facilities near Sharaud. The strikes use Iranian airspace but do not require GPS because they are terrain-following missiles with inertial guidance. Iran responds with ballistic missile strikes against Israeli air bases. Iron Dome is partially resupplied but not fully rebuilt. Interception rate is 60%. 40% of incoming missiles reach their targets. Damage to Israeli airfields is significant enough that F-35 operations are degraded, even if GPS jamming were lifted. In the next 6 to 12 months, the region is in active multi-front conflict. U.S. commits additional carrier groups, but does not position them inside the Gulf. Air operations are launched from Diego Garcia and from land bases in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, if those governments permit use of their territory, which becomes the key diplomatic question. Iran activates proxy forces in Iraq and Syria. Hezbollah launches rocket campaigns from Lebanon. The war spreads across 4 countries. Oil exports from the Gulf drop 70%. Global energy prices double. The economic shock forces ceasefire negotiations, but the ceasefire is tactical exhaustion, not strategic resolution. All parties remain postured for resumption. The 30-year period of uncontested U.S. air superiority in the Middle East is over. Both of those scenarios are in motion right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications. When the first signal appears, the analysis will be here. The question that all of this leads to, and that the next 72 hours will force an answer to, is whether the United States will accept a regional posture where carrier-based air superiority is no longer guaranteed, or whether the Pentagon calculates that restoring credibility requires holding position even under saturation risk. In the next 48 hours, watch whether the USS Gerald Ford changes position. The carrier is currently operating in the central Strait of Hormuz. If it moves east toward open ocean, that tells you Central Command has decided the risk of remaining in saturation range exceeds the strategic value of the position. If it holds current position, that tells you the decision has been made to demonstrate that U.S. naval presence will not be displaced by drone swarms, regardless of the radar degradation. Both choices have consequences. Movement is tactically prudent and strategically interpreted as retreat. Holding position is strategically firm and tactically vulnerable. In the next week, watch whether Israeli Air Force attempts any sorties from Nevatim or Ramon air bases in the south. Both bases are outside the current GPS jamming radius. If Israel launches sorties, that tells you they have calculated that restoring the perception of operational capability is worth the risk of losses. It also tells you that Israel is not waiting for U.S. diplomatic efforts and is choosing the escalation path. If no sorties are attempted, that tells you Israel is waiting, either for U.S.-led negotiations to produce jamming shutdown or for U.S.-provided counter-jamming systems to arrive and be installed. In the next month, watch whether the Pentagon submits a supplemental budget request that includes emergency funding for counter-drone and counter-swarm systems. The annual budget was submitted in February. It did not include significant counter-swarm line items because the threat assessment at that time did not prioritize saturation scenarios. If a supplemental request appears in late May, that tells you the Wednesday event has been classified internally as a threshold change that requires acquisition strategy shift. The funding request will not say, because Iran proved our defenses are obsolete. It will say, emerging threats require updated capabilities. The language will be bureaucratic. The meaning will be clear. When USS Gerald Ford moves, or when it visibly does not move past the 72-hour mark, the analysis will be here. Not a summary, not a headline repeat. Evidence, assessment, what it means for the trajectory, in that order. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The mainstream coverage will tell you the carrier moved or did not move. We will tell you what the movement means for the scenario paths, what it signals about Pentagon risk assessment, and what the next decision point becomes once movement is determined. This is not a story that resolves in one news cycle. This is the kind of story where every decision creates the conditions for the next decision, and the sequence matters more than any single event. We are tracking the decision sequence, the technical constraints that limit the options, and the strategic calculations that determine which constrained option gets chosen. That is what this channel does. Evidence first, analysis second. What it means for you, always. We will see you in the next. This is the channel.